Hello everyone, my name is Ian Allens, and today I'll be talking about one of my most favorite graphic novels of all time, The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. And during the late 80s and early 90s, DC Comics lost an indie imprint that was meant to reel in new readers and wanted a separate narrative from the average superhero comic. This imprint was called Vertigo. Neil arrived and blended horror, fantasy, and modern fiction into a story about entities that embody the core traits of humanity itself. These these entities are known as the Endless. He created Neil created something extraordinary when superheroes were becoming more ordinary. Now, the story of Volume 1. The Sandman is a series of graphic novels elongated into multiple volumes, but I'll only be focusing on the context of Volume 1. Sandman, also known as Morpheus and the Lord of Dreams, was captured by a cult run by a man named Mr. Burgess and his son Alex Burgess. The cult's original plan was to capture Death, Morpheus's sister, and control her. However, their incantation brought Morpheus instead. The cult stripped him of his tools and scattered them all over the globe. For decades, Sandman was imprisoned underneath Burgess's manor, only to liberate himself and take swift vengeance against an aging Alice Burgess decades later. Sandman soon returned to his realm, only to find out that his kingdom was decaying from years of neglect. Morpheus finds an immediate purpose in tracking down his tools, a medallion, a pouch of sand, and a helmet, as well as restoring his realm. However, when his purpose is fulfilled, he finds himself stagnating, lost without a drive. At this point, his sister Death comes to his aid and establishes and they help establish a new reason to live and enjoy the life he has. This story has gained a devoted following and subject has been the subject of many articles from critics and fans. The first article that we'll be seeing today will be is called Neil Gaiman's The Sandman and Joseph Campbell in Search of the Modern Myth by Stephen Roch. Stephen Roch writes an article about the popularity of myth being eclipsed by an age of reason and logic. However, he does look towards Joseph Campbell, who preaches the importance of myth. Joseph believed that myth was, and I quote, "It would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the exhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation." End quote. Stephen declares that the Sandman is an example of a modern day myth. He continues to form parallels between Joseph Campbell and the graphic novel by connecting the four functions of a myth: the mystical wonder, the cosmology, the sociological, and the logical. My response. I always thought that Sandman was different from all the other fantasy books, like Harry Potter or Star Wars. However, I was surprised that Stephen was actually making a connection between such an antediluvian concept uh, by making a connection between an antediluvian concept and a modern piece of fiction. This article helps me understand the work and creativity that went into the novel. The four functions of a myth are actually fit perfectly in the story itself. The mythical wonder comes from the main character Morpheus and the horrific or fanciful settings he finds himself in, like the dreaming, a living house, and a vast void of white. The cosmology function was portrayed by Morpheus and his family, the Endless. These beings were the personification of dream, desire, delirium, destruction, destiny, and despair. The psychological function is achieved through Sandman's struggles and bouts of humanity throughout the series, and the sociological function was through the many religions that become outdated and replaced with newer religions. In my response, I would like to say that Stephen makes a powerful argument. However, I would ultimately refuse this hypothesis, since the endless aren't gods, simply manifestations of human traits and human experiences. Okay, on to Article 2. Daniel Croce wrote an article about the deconstruction of Sandman and how it pertains to Christian religion and a philosophical belief called the Panopticon, also known as the infernal model, where the watcher and the watched cannot flee from. In this article, the Panopticon is also known as a metaphor for eternal surveillance in the docile form. This is referenced as a sense of tragedy that people are struggling with today. This article focuses on Volume 2 of the series, called The Kindly Ones, but can easily extrapolate to Volume 1 as well. As Danielle stated in her article, the Sandman harnesses a profound connection with Elizabethan and Greek tragedy, nearly replicating them from story beat to story beat. These references establish establishes these references point to gods, established gods, continue throughout the book, and its melancholic tone roots this into modern day tragedy. The article also explained a persistent motif that lasts throughout the entire novel, which is that the inevitability of the natural order in the novel. Morpheus has to make sacrifices for the stability of humanity. My response. Daniel Croce does make an interesting argument by noting the many tragedies that happen in the series as a whole. Volume 2 held a somber tale about a girl chasing for her missing brother, who was being exploited by his abusive foster parents. This article helped me understand a core motif that I happened to miss from my first read. The theme of the natural order has been peppered throughout the entirety of the series, including Morpheus, including Volume 1. There are many instances of Morpheus doing morally questionable actions in service to the greater good of humanity. For my response to this article, I wish that they could make an article, I wish they could make another article based on the first volume and see what they could extrapolate it. See what they can extrapolate from the experience. Now, to the final one. This article talks about the reputation that comic books receive from the public eye. Cyril Camus begins the diatribe by explaining the history of graphic novels and attempting to explain the differences between comics and graphic to explain the difference between comics and graphic novels. As an example, he references Neil Gaiman's Sandman as an inspiring piece of literature that triggered a rise in graphic novels in the late 80s and early 90s. Cyril continues to notify the opinions befalling comic books and graphic novels by referencing a conversation between Neil Gaiman and an interviewer named H.Y. Bender, and exposes the mistreatment that comic books have been subjected to for decades. Once, quoted by Neil Gaiman, once while at a party in London, the editor of the literary reviews page of a major newspaper struck up a conversation with me, and we chatted pleasantly until he asked what I did for a living. I write comics, I said, and I watched the editor's interest instantly drain away, as if he suddenly realized he was speaking to someone beneath his nose. Just to be polite, he followed by inquiring, "Oh, yes? Oh, yes? Which comics have you written?" So I mentioned a few titles, which he nodded perfunctorily, and I concluded, "I also did this thing called Sandman." At that point, he became excited and said, "Hang on, I know who you are. You're Neil Gaiman." I admitted that I was. "My God, man, you don't write comics," he said. "You write graphic novels." This was my favorite article out of the bunch. It neatly and effectively explained the struggle comics have been facing for years. The interview, the interview, the quote stood out to me the most since the other articles didn't have direct quotes from Neil Gaiman himself. It gave the article a sense of authenticity and revealed Neil's gripes about his talents being judged because he wrote comic books. I was also surprised to know that Neil was involved with the popularity of graphic novels as a whole during the 80s and 90s. Sandman's influence had a wider berth than I believed it to, and is even being celebrated today.